The winter of 2004 was a lucrative season for the games industry. No matter their platform of preference, players opened their wallets to buy first-rate sequels to their favorite games. Metroid Prime 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, San Andreas, Halo 2. On the PC, the success of The Sims 2, World of Warcraft, and Half-Life 2 gave EA, Blizzard, and Valve cause for Christmas celebration. Video games were making a killing. In Irvine, California, the last remaining staff of Troika Games loaded their belongings into boxes. The RPG that had cost 30 people 3 grueling years of blood, sweat, and tears hadn't even broken the PC top 20. This is the story of the death of a game, and what came after. When you talk about Troika, the facts come in threes. The 3 pillars of the company: art, design, and code. Troika had a strong interdisciplinary culture. Writers built levels, programmers devised quests, animators wrote dialogue.
One lasting impact from Troika for me is that design, art, and code must all work together toward a common goal, and no part is less than the other.
Embodying those disciplines, the 3 founders who shared the title of CEO. Tim Kaine, Leonard Boyarsky, and Jason Anderson had created Fallout at Interplay, where their habit of making decisions collectively had led to the nickname the Troika. But disillusioned with the loss of creative agency on the sequel, the 3 had moved on.
I left when I felt like I had lost control of Fallout. I was proud of the game and happy that people were so passionate about it, but I realized it wasn't mine anymore, and never would be.
Their new company was an expression of their beliefs.
We had a casual environment. Open hours, kept the fridge and kitchen fully stocked with sodas and snacks, had weekly lunch catered in or barbecues on the patio, took everyone to movie premieres, matched their retirement plans for a full 3% with no vesting period, had very competitive pay scales, and put most of the employees into offices rather than cubicles. Had a lounge with couches and console games, a big screen TV, game nights, etc.
Troika was the place they'd always wanted to work, a business created in their own image.
Tim had a dog and we would go on walks together in the afternoon. It was a great midday break and the dog was awesome. I've always looked for companies that allowed pets since.
In contrast to the many levels of management at Interplay, the founders decided to reject the usual conventions of corporate hierarchy.
We decided to pay everyone the same salary, so we hired only senior, experienced people. If the game brought in any money, we would split the amount 50-50. Half would go to the company and funding our next game. The other half would be split evenly among us. At the end of the project, that's exactly what we did. We were kind of like communists, which made our company name even more appropriate.
And then there were the 3 games they made during their brief existence. Arcanum, a steampunk RPG that 20 years later is still lauded as one of the finest examples of the form. The Temple of Elemental Evil, a classic D&D adaptation, praised for its faithfulness to its pen and paper counterpart. And then there was the 3rd, a licensed title based on White Wolf's World of Darkness setting. A few years earlier, the first video game set in that universe, Nihilistic's Vampire the Masquerade Redemption, had taken its cues from Diablo, but this would take elements from Deus Ex. Pitching to publishers, they found a partner in Activision and began development on Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. Activision execs were eager to be the first to license the Source engine. They saw Bloodlines as an opportunity to exploit its advanced features and cash in on the anticipation around Half-Life 2. And that suited Troika. Their game was full of conversations with colourful characters, and Source's facial animation tools could render those interactions as vivid visually as they were verbally. The artificial intelligence and scripting capabilities seemed like a perfect fit for an immersive first-person RPG, and the networking code was the ideal foundation for the Vampire vs. Vampire Hunter multiplayer mode.
With Vampire, Troika is proving Source can reach beyond the world of FPS games. The character system, rendering abilities, and contextual AI features of Source, combined with the veteran RPG design talent at Troika, is a great representation of the innovation we hope to enable with this technology.
By the terms of their contract, Troika couldn't bring their game to market before Half-Life 2 shipped, but that was no cause for concern. Activision set a March 2004 release date, a comfortable 6 months after Half-Life 2's.
We wanted to use some cutting-edge technology to push the RPG genre, and since we have worked with some key figures over at Valve before, it just seemed like a natural choice. Working with an engine with the potential that this one has is a rare opportunity. There have been no major bumps or drawbacks yet.
Famous last words. Half-Life 2 was further from finished than Valve was publicly letting on, and the team soon found that the engine they were building on was a moving target. AI wasn't yet fully implemented, so Troika had to roll their own. New builds of the engine forced the reworking of parts of the game they'd previously deemed complete, and their relationship with Valve was constructive, but they were crunching on Half-Life 2. They helped where they could, but supporting other studios wasn't their priority. Production was difficult, and the workload intense.
It might be better to think of Bloodlines' development in terms of non-crunch time. Arcanum had about a year of non-crunch time, and Vampire about 1 or 2 months. I am not kidding.
Even so, much of the team remained in high spirits.
It really was like a 1 in a million shot. A lot of the developers were younger devs. It was fun, and the owners all gave us a lot of freedom to do what we wanted. It was kind of like an indie project in that if you wanted to work on something, you could.
But with an ambitious design brief and an uncooperative engine, Troika was struggling and failing to meet the milestones set by their publisher. They had no way of knowing it, but thousands of miles away, something was happening that would throw their schedule into chaos.
Well, finally, hackers have apparently stolen the source code of a popular video game. The digital blueprints for Half-Life 2 are being shared in chat rooms. Gamers fear the theft might further delay the release of the sequel. Half-Life 2 is scheduled to hit stores.
Valve were forced to admit that Half-Life 2 wouldn't be out in 2003. In the end, it would take another 14 months of work. But that delay had a knock-on effect. Troika's contract prevented them from releasing first. So when Half-Life 2 slipped, so did Bloodlines. That bought Troika some desperately needed time, but there was a sting in the tail. Activision's patience was wearing thin. Bloodlines was to be one of their final PC exclusives. They were already winding down that side of the business. They wanted to be done with it. The sooner the better. So they intervened. They sent in a producer to manage Troika and guide the game to release. The man they chose for the job was veteran game developer David Mullick.
Things were in a pretty sorry state when I came aboard. An unfinished design and game engine, technical problems with the multiplayer code, many game levels that were created and then thrown out, and so on. So my job was to get the game on track, basically get them to finish up stuff. Let's finish up this level before going on to the next. Let's reach closure. And to do that, I had to be an embedded producer there.
The multiplayer component was quickly given the axe, and Mullick forced the team to focus on fixing bugs and rounding off existing content. Tensions rose. But Activision went further. Their hands contractually tied, they took control of the timetable the only way they could, by moving the relative release date from 6 months after Half-Life 2 to the same day. The team at Troika knew that the deadline would leave them no room to polish, and their release would be totally overshadowed. But their protests, including Mullick's, made no difference. The game was already late and over budget. The release date was immovable. Marketing had spoken.
We were told to wrap it up in a matter of months, at a point where we knew that was going to require a lot of crunch. It was pretty obvious at that point that we weren't considered a very important project anymore.
After months of crunch, the team were now spending every available moment trying to get the game into a shippable state.
We were adding elements right up until the end. There were many late nights spent trying to make sure that all the planned art and design content was in and functional.
Faith in the project was so low that some team members quit, convinced that the game would never see the light of day. Many remember this time as the most intense of their career.
I eventually wound up staying on site at Troika, which required me to drive a 180-mile round-trip commute each day through the worst of Los Angeles traffic. I'd usually leave my house at 7 a.m. and often wouldn't get back home until 2 a.m. that night, and this went on for 6 months until the game was finished.
And then, Activision played one final card. On October the 4th, 2004, 6 weeks before the scheduled release date, Bloodlines developers were instructed to stop.
We'd have continued to improve the game, especially by fixing bugs and finishing incomplete areas, but they didn't let that happen. They picked a version as the gold master for duplication, and then they held that version close until the ship date. We fixed some bugs, but they didn't want to pass new builds to quality assurance.
With no support from the publisher, the team continued to work on a day one patch, but everyone at Troika knew that the development freeze meant releasing a game they were deeply unhappy with.
The most depressing thing I think about it was that for 3-4 years we worked on it, I'd say for a good 75 to 80% of that time, it wasn't a game. It didn't really come together, you couldn't really play it. It was almost like as soon as we had a game and it started coming together, it was starting to be fun, we saw what we had and we saw the light at the end of the tunnel, it was like, we have to shut down now and get this thing out the door as soon as possible.
The Gold Master was still full of bugs, glitches, and unfinished areas.
Some of the most egregious examples included the game crashing when a Nosferatu player character finished a particular map. The crash was discovered after the embargo, along with the disheartening fact that no one in quality assurance at Activision had ever tested the Nosferatu character. We were also working on smoothing out the walking animations of characters during in-game cinematic sequences. The embargo occurred during the middle of this process, which left a great many characters skating or stuttering during those sequences. And the Warrens, near the end of the game, were barely populated with creatures when development was frozen. No balancing or dialogue was added at all.
On the week of Bloodlines' launch, the attention of PC gamers was focused on Half-Life 2. Valve's long-anticipated sequel was met with an exuberant reception, but a reader who managed to find a review of Bloodlines would see a harsh contrast.
My suspicion? There's some bloodsucker in a suit who decided this needed to be out ASAP to recoup cash. This game needed at least another 2 months of development polish, and someone decided they couldn't afford it. Whoever they are, they need to be staked through the heart. Give me the implement and I'd hammer it home myself.
Reviewers praised the opening chapters, but the bottom line was unanimous. The game was obviously incomplete and crawling with bugs. Going up against heavyweight competition, Troika needed an exceptional critical consensus for the game to be noticed. A 6 out of 10 was a death sentence. Half-Life 2 sold 6.5 million retail copies. Bloodlines sold 72,000.
It was dumped on the market at the worst possible time. Most people didn't even know we were out. Both fans and the Troika devs are always going to wonder what the game could have been like with another 6 months.
Troika's developers had to come to terms with the failure of the project they'd worked so hard on, and their feelings that their efforts had been undermined.
I don't have to restate how demoralizing these issues were to the team. All of these problems were easily solvable with more time, but that time was not available.
In the final weeks before their closure, Troika made several proposals to publishers. A sequel to the Temple of Elemental Evil, an MMO set in a mythical 19th century Eastern Europe, They made a pitch demo for Fallout 3, but we know how that turned out. And they tried to court interest in another game set in the world of darkness.
We never plotted out or pitched a true sequel to Bloodlines. We did start prototyping a Werewolf the Forsaken game quickly with Bloodlines assets in the hope of selling it to another publisher. Although due to Bloodlines sales numbers, nobody picked it up. There was a story, pitch doc, and a demo all done in a matter of weeks.
But no publisher would take on any of these ideas. The only offers they received were for projects they weren't interested in. The founders, burned out by the stress of running a business, decided enough was enough.
We voluntarily shut down while we were still in the black financially. We could lay off employees with severance packages and extend their insurance for a few months, rather than just shut down with no notice and kick everyone out. In the end, Vampire shipped in November 2004. We closed the office in February, and Troika officially ceased to be a company in September 2005.
Troika had lasted 7 years.
I have no regrets, but I definitely wouldn't want to do it again. I'll leave running companies to other people. We really wanted to make games. That's all we wanted to do.
Troika didn't survive the failure of Bloodlines, but they went out on their own terms, staying loyal to their people and true to their ideals to the end. So that brings us back to the winter of 2004. An unfinished game, a tepid response, and a team scattered to the winds. It seemed like Bloodlines had missed its shot. But if that had been the end of the story, we wouldn't still be talking about it 18 years later. Against all odds, Bloodlines hadn't failed. It was about to be reborn.
In the lighted silence of a dream within a dream, you fill my soul with beauty on my shining man machine, sinking in the roses falling down to fade away. Your velvet blade of apathy makes the crush so bittersweet, and I could have died last night, but I heard the voice of a smaller God, and I could have died last night, but I heard the voice of a smaller God. Your presence is the morning, your absence is the night. I'm searching your dark hallways and I'm trying to find your light. Swimming your sad oceans, I'm drowning in your sea. This will all be over soon and we'll learn to live again. And I could have died last night, but I heard the voice of a smaller God, and I could have died last night, but I heard the voice of a smaller God.
Only a few people played Bloodlines at release, but for many of them, the game cast a potent spell. Some spread the word, some used their talents to bring the game closer to its original vision. Some were inspired to make creations of their own, fan art, cosplay, even new games that followed Bloodlines' lead, and many journalists held it worthy of critical reappraisal.
Bloodlines manages to be funny, humane, if not human, brutal, horrifying, and thrilling all at once. Its vampires are larger than life and yet nevertheless alive. Their twisted traits come tumbling out in excellent dialogue and strange quests. It is heavy on heavy themes, ideas that might otherwise pervert the purity of any other action game. Seduction, sedition, schizophrenia, propaganda, pornography, purgatory. These thematic notions are the lifeblood of vampire fiction, and they're essential to what's going on in here. The struggle between the vampire castes is at once noble and despicable, and picking your route through its pitfalls is a delight.
Of the 3 games Troika released, Bloodlines was by far their worst seller, and it had the most turbulent development, a trait seemingly inherited by its sequel, current status unknown. But it's the Troika game with the fiercest following, and that's thanks to the efforts of journalists, modders, and fans who've spent years working on it, shouting about it, shining a spotlight on a game that deserved better. Activision made bad calls on Bloodlines, but the seductively simple version of this story, where all the good parts of the game came from Troika and the bad were the result of publisher meddling, doesn't quite hold up. Troika were unlucky, but they weren't blameless. They'd already earned a reputation for leaving games unfinished. And for all their mismanagement, Activision did put their weight behind the project in the first place. And despite the risks, a small team making their first ambitious 3D game in an engine nobody had used before, closed a deal to furnish Troika with the most sought-after technology in the industry. But every story needs an antagonist. Now more than ever, I'm reluctant to give Activision any credit. But one thing we can say is that without them, there'd be no Bloodlines. Its road was rough, but it's now a genre classic. Its success was a team effort. Activision backed it, Troika built it, and the fans spent the last 2 decades perfecting it. But for the past 18 years, only Activision has reaped the profits of that success. So seeing Bloodlines go from commercial failure to cult favourite must be a bittersweet outcome for the members of the team. To have poured everything into a game that people loved, while others got rich. A common fate in the games industry, but a particularly ironic one for a company with an egalitarian streak. For those who went through hell to make it, Bloodlines may never have been a source of profit, but it was, and still is, a source of pride.
Every once in a while, you read a retrospective of one of them, even though they talk about their faults as well as the good things. It's just really nice that people care so much about the stuff that we made.